Good morning. Hi. Hi, everyone. We're thrilled to be here. I'm so grateful to IWPR for putting this topic on the agenda. And honestly, as we've been talking about over the last day and a half, one of the key concerns with women's policy right now is the loss of our reproductive rights and our access to health care. And as Jamila just said, costing our economy $68 billion per year. And also holding that the Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky yesterday said we could even win that right back next year. But in order to do that, we need every single voice in our society clamoring for it. And so that is really the work that we on the stage endeavor to do, which is to bring some unlikely allies into the conversation in the form of companies. My name is Julia Taylor Kennedy. I'm Senior Director of Corporate Engagement at the Center for Reproductive Rights. I come to reproductive rights from a long career in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging research, working directly with companies to get them to talk about some other topics that sometimes they didn't want to confront. And I'm really excited to be on the stage with Sunita Thakkar Mahtani and with Jesse Matton, who have both taught me quite a bit in my short 18 months in this role at CRR. And so now we're going to give you a condensed version of the learnings that they brought to me as I got started in the space. So Sunita, why don't we talk with you first? Corporate engagement can mean a lot of things. And so how, over the course of your career, how have you approached that work differently, and where have you landed in terms of your perspective on corporate engagement?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And the feeling is very mutual. Learned a ton from you, so very excited to be on the stage with you both. So I spent some time in corporate America. I also spent time at Girls Inc., so I'll take us back there. When I was at Girls Inc., Girls Inc. is a nonprofit that inspires girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And I was at the Long Island affiliate, and we were very small, and it was important for us to grow very fast and furiously. And we'd look at companies in Long Island and talk to them about supporting us, sponsoring us, and funding us. So it was very much a one-way street. We went to them and asked them, what is it that they can do for us? So that was sort of my first real entree into corporate engagement. A couple years later, I landed at Catalyst. Catalyst is a global nonprofit that improves workplace for women and has research and data that companies, it's a membership model, so companies can actually become supporters, and by becoming supporters, they have access to Catalyst's research and solutions. So I would work with companies on understanding what were their DEI and gender equity goals, and work very narrowly with them on how Catalyst's research and solutions can improve their own internal goals. Again, one-way street. Then I landed at Planned Parenthood. And at Planned Parenthood, we were tasked, our team, to think about corporate activism. And we did not have a monetary goal. Our wonderful division and development gets to work on that. And we had to work with corporations on how can they further the movement. So it really became an idea of thinking through a two-way street. So when we approach corporations, we talk about how it is that by furthering the movement, by supporting us, we can increase and help their ROI. We can make a strong business case that it is in their best interest for all functions of their business to support Planned Parenthood. And that is the work we do, and it's become a two-way street now.
It's interesting because I think, as you say, with Planned Parenthood, a lot of what you're approaching companies to do is to act and be vocal. And that is kind of what's in common among the three of us on the stage. That's really where we're working with companies to move toward. Sometimes that action can be quiet. It can either be looking at an internal policy, but it can also be having a private conversation with a policymaker or a lawmaker that can be incredibly influential. So a good example of that is Bank of America a few years ago was very active in pushing back against the bathroom bill in North Carolina. An example of a more loud action in the repro space would be Levi's, which was the first company to kind of publicly, after the Dobbs decision was leaked, say they were shocked and very concerned and wanted to provide funding for their employees to travel to receive abortion. And then it's so funny because we talked to them all the time, and they said, so we went out and we made the statement, and then we looked over our shoulder, and they had to wait weeks before other companies came forward, and then they did, but that was sort of an act of bravery as being the first mover from Levi's, and a lot of companies are not willing to take that action. And then the third partner that we think is so amazing, that takes more of a dialogical approach, is Amalgamated Bank, and there's someone from Amalgamated Bank here in the room today. But what's wonderful about Amalgamated Bank is when we sat down for our first conversation with them, Maura Keeney, who's SVP there, said, I really want to know from you what's best for the movement, and I want to be in dialogue with you so that we're giving one another feedback so that we do find something that's mutually beneficial. And so, whether quiet or loud, we get to help her decide. And so I think there are lots of different ways to engage with companies that aren't necessarily the headline in the paper. And I know, Jesse, you're incredibly creative at approaching this. And also, not only do we need corporate partners that are willing to work with us, we also need corporate partners that our organizations are comfortable engaging with for a whole host of reasons. And one of the amazing lessons that Jessie taught me was to describe how she set up a process to decide who to engage with, because we hold power as organizations in terms of who we partner with too. So I'm curious, how does that work, and how did you develop it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Jessie Matton. I'm with the National Partnership for Women and Families, and I've been with the team for about 3 years, after about a decade with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on their foundation side, which, for those of you that are familiar, it's a very different organization than who I'm with now. And that experience really allowed me to lay the groundwork, so how to go in with intentionality around partnerships. I had a very unique experience of working in a nonprofit, technically, that ran like a business, and I worked only with the business community for the most part, and then tried to set them up with partners that the whole goal is around how to help companies do more good, finding those avenues for them. But in exchange, by being with the Chamber, a very business-friendly entity, I got really a peek under the hood in terms of how companies think about materiality to their business, where their partnerships are structured as to who is the decision maker that would be the domino effect to a company being, loud and vocal on an advocacy issue? Is the PR and the comms more important than the internal, policies? Knowing those things completely changes how you approach a company partnership, and you have to acknowledge that every single company is different, and that takes a lot of work to, especially in the nonprofit community where our capacity is stretched so thin all the time, to think about every company as an individual relationship, I think, is step one. And also recognizing that no one organization is perfect. There is bad histories really across every single institution in this country, and understanding that complexity is something that really took a lot of conversation internally in my organization, because I came from a place, being a native Washingtonian, that I'm also very frustrated at the pace that Congress moves, and many of my colleagues were very frustrated about some of the policies and practices of the business community. Frustrations on both sides. And so, when we're having conversations around, okay, how do we make an impact? Let's think about the reach that employers have just within their workforce alone, not even thinking about their supply chain, their shareholder capitalism framing, things along those lines. Really allowed, I think, my colleagues to understand where I was coming from in terms of why it's important to bring them along. So, but at the same time, there is really important just kind of frameworks and boundaries to recognize in terms of your own culture's your own organization's culture, where people are comfortable. So we set up a corporate giving policy that was really allowed to give us a framework in terms of, okay, let's have multiple people around the table weigh in on when we have an opportunity to take finances from another company, making sure that everyone feels good about that there's senior executives on the business side that has been connected to senior executives on our team. So it's not just, and that is a point to building a sustainable relationship too. So you're really making sure that you are reaching the proper decision makers that will really help change the opportunities down the road in terms of being a vocal, advocate on something, or actually having the decision-making power to change internal policies and processes. So, thinking about how, and I think one of the things that is special about where we sit is that for the most part, the points of contact that we're working with are the people that are fighting the same fight that we are, just inside of a different type of entity. They are your allies. They are oftentimes an echo chamber in terms of, they don't need the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what they do need are the resources, the communications, the technical assistance to make the case inside their own organization to inspire action. So, I think that's one of my favorite things about where we sit, is that we're working with really amazing, passionate people that are trying to do really good things and move a really, really big ship at the same time. And so recognizing, those dynamics helps ground the relationships, I think, for success, and, put some things in motion to lay a framework for sustainability and success in the long run.
Incredibly well put. I think it is so important to recognize that when you're partnering with a company, often you're across the table with someone who is incredibly and sometimes even more passionate about your values, because they're not spending 40, 50, 60 hours a day in the issue, but this is something that they really get to do. And you get to support them in pushing it forward and pushing their company in a better direction. Which is an amazing bridge to the next thing I wanted to ask you, Sunita, because everyone in this room, I would assume, at least many of us, are in the work of organizing, building partnerships, bringing stakeholders around to our point of view, whether that's policymakers or folks at other organizations or within coalition work, convincing them with narrative, with data, as we've heard about so much here in the past couple of days. What is similar or different about doing that with corporate partners versus a coalition or a policymaker?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly the same. So my background is social work. And first day of social work school, I learned the golden rule. Meet a client where a client is at. When you're working with corporations, you just sub-client to corporations. Meet a corporation where a corporation is at. So I'll give you an example of some of the work that we did in this past year. This past year, we collaborated with our Chief Health Innovation Officer to look at the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation and how it was really harming our patients and society when you think about reproductive health care and access. And so we were tasked as a corporate engagement team to see who could be our corporate allies in this fight. So if you think about your basic Venn diagram, so Planned Parenthood is here, and we had to think about what corporations had a shared problem. And we came up with pharmaceutical companies that are in the contraception and birth control space. And so we all have this shared problem of misinformation and disinformation. So we got in touch with 5 leading pharmaceutical companies that have contraception products and asked them to meet. We served as a convener. They came to Planned Parenthood offices. They had never met. They were all competitors in this way. They've met it, in the world, but in this way as competitors. And we met to really see if we can agree that we had a shared problem and where could we go in terms of a shared solution to fight misinfo and disinfo. We brought in PPFA experts. So as a nonprofit, we have to establish ourselves as experts on this. We brought in experts that were able to provide data of what we were seeing from our patients and from the communities that we served to them. By the end of the first meeting, they all agreed that it was important for them to rise above their own product and to work as a collective to fight misinfo and disinfo. We first met in December. We've continued to meet since then. Each meeting, we bring in PPFA experts, and we've asked them even to look inside themselves and think about how the pharmaceutical industry has taken part in the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation. We studied past epidemics and looked at how misinfo and disinfo was treated and solved for in previous epidemics. We are now at a place, just this past month, where we've completed a vision. We have goals. We're working on awareness, education, and advocacy, and looking to launch soon and call in more folks into this conversation. So that is completely grassroots movement building coalition work. So I say it's exactly the same.
I appreciate that, and I think what's so amazing about what you've accomplished there is corporate engagement in repro is new. You know, it's not like some other spaces where there's more of an established understanding of the reasons this is relevant to companies, how they can come together in a non-competitive space like they understand on some other issues. And so it is amazing to have these bigger companies building a coalition table of their own. You know, I think as I've started developing partnerships and exploring some of the work also within our organizations to extend to reach companies can be as small as an additional fact to a story that you're telling to many different audiences, and that can sometimes make it feel a little less intimidating. You know, one of the things that CRR is doing a lot of is pursuing, you know, we call ourselves the lawyers of the movement, pursuing a lot of exceptions cases, you know, pointing out how unclear those medical exceptions are in abortion bans around the country. And one of our biggest cases was the Zorowski v. Texas case, which ultimately we lost, but has turned into an amazing point of raising awareness and messaging around the country. Our lead plaintiff, Amanda Zorowski, many of you have probably heard this story, but had pregnancy complications, needed abortion care, was told she wasn't sick enough, was sent home, then ended up going into septic shock and being in the ICU for 2 weeks. Her family flew in from all over the country to be at her bedside, and you know, she survived, and she is a fighter and a survivor, and she's an employee of Indeed.
Yeah.
Companies don't want this happening to their employees.
Right.
For a host of reasons, for the business case reasons and the economic reasons, and also because they have all managed teams, and they don't want that to happen to someone on their team. Yeah. And so sometimes in the narrative, it's extending the narrative with an additional detail that brings it home to them, that has them then leaning forward and saying, what can we do? Jesse, I'm curious, you know, this was an amazing, valuable partnership that we just heard from Sunita. What is a partnership that you've built that has brought a lot of value, or generally what is a dynamic that you look to build in partnership?
And it's interesting, I totally agree with you on the last conversation in regards to some of the coalition building being so similar. But at the same time, there are fundamental ways that the business community just works differently than the nonprofit community in terms of the pace and the number of eyeballs that need to see something before it can move forward. So I think, you know, when I think about building up our most, you know, kind of successful and really exciting partnerships, me understanding that dynamic on the side of the individual company, and them also understanding very well what we do. For folks that are outside of DC and outside of the government affairs office, for them to understand the way that we work with Hill staff, the way that we work in regards to technical assistance across committees, during testimonies and hearings, the way we work in coalition, and the way that there's coalitions for every single issue and then sub-issues, they really need to understand that to understand the pace that we also move. And so once we're on really solid footing in that way, which does take time and a lot of work for especially points of contact that are outside the government affairs office in particular, I think from there, one of the things that the dynamics that I think build the MVP partnership are the companies that you can turn to and you can be like, look, I've got an idea, or look, we've got this opportunity. It's not baked. We think the business voice would be super powerful here. I think your voice is the right voice. You have the internal workforce lineup in terms of your internal policies. You've got the public visibility. You've got the kind of history of leading on this issue, whatever that case is that you believe they are the right partner. And being able to build something together around that, and kind of going in with like are you game to throw spaghetti at the wall? I've got some ideas. And that I have found, when you can put yourself in a position to co-create opportunities with businesses, is a lot more successful. Particularly, I think about sometimes when we all write a lot of pieces for our individual organization blogs or through our research. We've got so much written content, and oftentimes it's a business voice that is going to be the better carrier of a message. So, being game to be like, okay, so we're thinking about this, and we've seen this opportunity come up a couple of times on different issues, whether it's reproductive rights in particular has been one that has been really important for the business community to be the voice, particular for how much scrutiny and really just so much weight and work that's falling on the reproductive rights and reproductive justice organizations. And then I think about, I think all of us, there's probably a lot of people in this room that are fans of Levi's because they do great work and they have a really strong history on social justice issues. But I had an opportunity to turn to Levi's and be like, look, there's some really important conversations going around birth control access. And there's not a lot of companies that are actually leading on this in terms of their workplace policies and the way that they've built their relationship very intentionally with their healthcare benefits provider. We want to sit down with members and we want to have a conversation so the members can really understand on the Hill where and how these investments are happening, what's made them kind of push them over the edge to really be so thoughtful and intentional about the investment in birth control. How can members carry that message? So those are, those are kind of a couple of examples. And I think also, working towards candor is always a really important place for me. I want to be able to be honest with them, and I want them to be able to be honest with me. It really just saves everyone time and energy of just also giving them being like, if you just don't feel like this is the right opportunity for you, totally understand. Know that we think that you would be great here, but we'll look for the next one. It just can save a lot of time and energy and resources on both sides.
A lot of wisdom packed into that answer. One thing that I think was so interesting about when you were talking about approaching a company and saying you've got your internal policies in line, you've started to speak out on the issue. I'm not going to remember the entire list. It was a very good list. Is it also shows the work that you engage in building up their capacity over time. And I mean, this is a long game, just like with any partnership. And you want a company, when they're going out to represent on an issue, to be able to back it up. And so I really appreciate that that's how you enter into partnership, to say, here, let me guide you, and I can help support you on the internal piece so that you're ready to help me with the external piece.
Yeah. And I will say really quickly, I think that there's often a scarcity mindset within the nonprofit community. We are all strapped for funds. Corporates are completely changing the game in terms of how they, strategize around their partnerships. And so leaning on each other, I mean, in terms of you've got resources that we don't have, those are ones that I want to be able to push towards the business community. Not everything has to be branded by your organization for you to be providing really valuable resources to to the companies. And so I think that kind of coalition mindset needs to continue to stay really strong, because none of us have the capacity to do all of the work on our own. So yeah, I really just appreciate the partnerships when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, a company that comes to mind for me, as you say that, is Bumble, who is one of our closest partners at the Center for Reproductive Rights. And it's a natural partnership because, you know, they were founded on principles of gender equity, and so it's natural that they should support reproductive rights and do it loudly. It's an extension of their brand. You know, they had already been doing a lot of work with other coalition partners when we entered into corporate engagement, and then did an amicus brief in the Zorowski case that I was talking about earlier, making the business case that dozens of other companies then came and signed on to. And then a couple of weeks ago, I found out that they also helped fund a film about the same case that debuted at Telluride. Their general counsel is speaking at the Austin premiere of the film tonight, and then they've sponsored Alamo Drafthouse to be screening it tomorrow all over the country. We had nothing to do with that, you know, and so while we always want to be in dialogue with our partners, it is amazing to see them independently moving to support reproductive rights, and I think eventually that's what we want to do. We want to create an ecosystem where companies also feel emboldened to act on their own. You know, we have a couple minutes left, and I want to address something because it's happening so much in our space, which is that right now some companies are really disappointing us on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Seems to be contracting. You know, not all companies. There's a lot of debate over whether this is overhyped, but there are some really tangible examples recently. I'm curious how that has affected your work or partnerships at all.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. One is it has made us get more and more deep when we think of talking to companies about the business case. We all know in this room the data and research when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. There's more innovation. It's better for their bottom line. It's better for recruitment. It's better for retention. And we go in very heavy with the business case. And you can't argue with that. There are two really amazing resources that I want to share. First is a coalition called Don't Ban Equality. Don't Ban Equality, for those of you who are not familiar, is a coalition of businesses that came about in 2019 when the rollbacks for abortion access were first occurring, and they reached out to Repro Justice Partners, both CRR and Planned Parenthood is on it, amongst others, and to look at us as guides of what they can do to help in this fight. Now, a few years later, we have over 1,000 businesses that are a part of Don't Ban Equality. They've been a part of amicus's briefs. They've been very vocal in terms of New York Times ads, and shown up for the movement in many ways, Times Square billboards and so forth. So there's the don'tbanequality.org, and that is something that you can recommend to your business partners to get involved with. Second thing that just launched this year and is actually launching right now at Clinton Global Initiative is the Reproductive and Maternal Health Compass. Now, this is a tool for companies to have to see where they fall when it comes to a range of reproductive and maternal health benefits. Planned Parenthood, along with some other Repro Justice Partners, were an advisor in developing these standards. This whole model was developed from the Human Rights Campaign Equality Index. So it has standards based on good, better, and best, and is a benchmarking tool. It has 16 different areas from fertility to menopause to abortion access, even pay transparency when it comes to political giving. So this is something that corporations can see where they fall, and you can work with them on improving their standards. This is a great tool to go in because this is something that we know when we look at employees and how much coverage in this country people get through work. Over 50% get coverage through work, and this is something that is formative of something we can do right now with the DEI backlash. It's also formative to join Don't Ban Equality. So I think those are very concrete things that we can meet companies where they're at with us.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is just keep pushing.
Yes,
keep pushing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, these ebb and flow. I mean, this is not new to anyone working in this field. Whether it's DEI, whether it's ESG, pick the acronym, pick the day, and we're going to go through something in regards to this similar type of backlash. I think, there's a lot of layers here in regards to the political landscape that we're in. And, when I think about how to not take advantage of this moment, but really like how do you rethink, given the dynamics that are obviously pressuring companies, and just one, keeping them on course, fighting the good fight, but also, okay, what can I be doing to lay the groundwork privately? If this is the time that they want to be quiet, I'll bring them to a nice quiet room and we can have some really important conversations about something else that doesn't scare you away. So for example, it's been a huge blessing in terms of how paid leave and child and caregiving have stayed very cleanly outside of the DEI conversation, yet they are two of the most impactful investments that we can make to actually build an inclusive economy for every single worker in this country. So, continuing to keep this paid leave conversation, keeping the name of the issues around, finding these avenues for them to come to the table on things that are not going to scare their PR teams, their comms team, their general counsel, whoever it might be, as well as much as is really, really hard to do, finding the ways to bring bipartisan or uncommon allies to the table around in these moments. It's whether it's on the House and the Senate side for bipartisan paid leave working groups, finding those uncommon allies in moments like this can also often be a really powerful way to continue to encourage companies to come to the table, and that we're working towards safe spaces for them to all progress in the right direction. This is a tricky time, but it will pass.
Yeah.
Thank you both. So you can see why I have learned so much from my panelists here. Our final question, which we don't have time for, but I will answer myself, was what's one thing that the audience can start to go do on corporate engagement? And I heard two gems today that I'm going to lift up for y'all as you head into your next session. The first is meet the client where they're at. Think about and both of you said that in different ways. Think about where the company is and meet them where they're at, then push them along. And the second is recognize the shared values, passion, and humanity of the person across the table from you, and that they want to help. They are there to help. And so starting from that place, two things are true. They may be very constrained, and they want to help, can really lay the groundwork for a great partnership with a company. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.